The room laughed when the billionaire said it. $3 million, Ethan Caldwell announced, slamming the check onto the table. But when you lose, your mother gets on her knees and polishes every piece on this board. 100 well-dressed guests chuckled, glasses in hand, eyes glittering with amusement. No one spoke up. No one stepped in. And at the center of it all stood Malik Turner, 18 years old, wearing a clean but worn jacket, his backpack still over one shoulder, a small black night pin catching the chandelier light for just a second. He didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't even look at the man who had just humiliated him in front of the entire room. He just pulled out the chair and sat down. That's when the laughter softened. Because there's a certain kind of calm you don't fake. And Malik had it. The kind that doesn't belong in a room like this. The kind that makes people uncomfortable without saying a word. Ethan smiled wider, confident, already imagining how this would end. But what he didn't know was that the quiet kid he had just tried to break had already beaten players far better than him, over 200 times in a row. And tonight, he was about to learn the cost of underestimating the wrong person. The chandeliers above Ethan Caldwell's penthouse didn't just shine. They burned. Gold light poured down over polished marble floors, over crystal glasses clinking in steady rhythm, over 100 people dressed in black and silver like they belonged to a different world. A string quartet played somewhere near the balcony, their music soft enough to be ignored but expensive enough to be noticed. Malik Turner stood just inside the service entrance. He didn't step fully into the room. Not yet. From where he stood, he could see everything without being seen. That was a habit he had learned early. Watch first. Move later. His mother, Janice, was near the back wall, moving quietly between tables with a tray. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. She had been working in this building for 12 years, and still, no one here knew her last name. Malik adjusted the strap of his worn backpack. The fabric was clean, but faded, edges softened by years of use. On the side, pinned carefully, was a small black knight, its paint chipped along the edges. He kept his hand near it, just for a second. Then he let go. "Hey!" a voice called out, sharp and amused. "Who let the kid in?" The music didn't stop. But something else did. A few heads turned. Then more. Ethan Caldwell stood near the center of the room, one hand wrapped around a glass of amber liquid, the other resting casually on the back of a velvet chair. He was smiling, the kind of smile that never asked for permission. His eyes locked on Malik. "Come on," Ethan said, louder now. "You look lost." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, not loud, not cruel enough to feel like cruelty, just enough to make it clear. Malik did not belong here. Malik didn't move. Ethan stepped closer, the crowd parting slightly to give him space. "Whose kid are you?" Malik glanced once toward his mother. Janice froze for half a second, then looked down, pretending to adjust a napkin that didn't need adjusting. Malik turned back. Janice Turner's son. A pause. Recognition flickered in Ethan's eyes, followed immediately by something else, something colder. "The help," he said, nodding slowly. "Right." Another wave of laughter, louder this time. Ethan circled him once like he was inspecting something he might buy or throw away. "You know, we're hosting a charity event tonight. Donations, scholarships, big ideas." He gestured broadly to the room. "Not exactly a playground." Malik stayed still. "Relax," Ethan added, raising a hand as if calming the room. "I'm not kicking him out." That got a few approving chuckles. Ethan's gaze drifted to the raised platform at the center of the penthouse. A chessboard sat there under a focused beam of light. ivory pieces, perfectly arranged. He smiled again. "You play chess?" he asked. Malik nodded once. That was enough. Ethan snapped his fingers, pointing toward the board. "Sit." The word hung in the air. A few guests leaned in, curious now. Phones began to appear, casually, discreetly, not yet recording, just ready. Malik walked forward. Each step echoed softly against the marble. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just walked like he had somewhere to be. Ethan followed, still smiling, still performing. They reached the table. Malik set his backpack down beside the chair. The black night pin caught the light for a brief second before the shadow swallowed it again. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. The room shifted. "You know what?" Ethan said, flipping it open, his voice rising just enough to command attention. "Let's make this interesting," he wrote quickly. The scratch of pen on paper cut through the music. Then he tore the check out and slapped it flat on the table. $3 million. The number landed heavier than the paper. Silence. Real silence this time. Ethan leaned in slightly. "You beat me. You take it." A murmur spread through the crowd. People turned fully now, no longer pretending to ignore what was happening. Malik looked at the check, then back at Ethan. "And if I lose?" he asked. Ethan's smile widened, slow and deliberate. "If you lose..." He glanced past Malik, straight at Janice. "Your mother gets down on her knees right here and polishes every piece on this board." The words didn't echo. They sank. Janice stopped moving completely. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Not enough to speak. Not enough to stop anything. Just enough to feel it. Ethan straightened. "Fair trade, right?" No one answered. Malik didn't look at the crowd. Didn't look at the cameras now quietly recording. Didn't even look at his mother. He pulled the chair out. The sound of wood against marble was louder than it should have been. Then he sat down. No anger. No protest. No hesitation. Just a quiet, steady motion. Ethan blinked once, almost surprised. Then he laughed. "Well, I'll be damned." He took his seat across from Malik, adjusting his cufflinks like this was just another part of the evening. "Let's give the kid a moment," someone said from the side, clapping lightly. More laughter. More phones raised. But something had changed. Not in the room. In the silence between them. Malik placed his hands on the edge of the table, fingers resting lightly on the wood. For a brief second, his thumb brushed against the edge of the board, feeling the grain, grounding himself. Across the room, Janice finally looked up. Their eyes met. She shook her head once. Small, almost invisible. "Don't." Malik held her gaze. Then, slowly, he reached forward and touched his first piece. The room leaned in. No one spoke. No one moved, because somewhere beneath the laughter, beneath the music, beneath the glitter and glass, something had just begun. And not a single person in that room knew how it was going to end. The first move had barely settled on the board when the memory came back to him. It always did. Not the room, not the faces, not the laughter still hanging in the air like smoke. The morning. 5:17 a.m. The alarm on Malik's dresser didn't ring so much as rattle. A cheap plastic clock with a crack across its face, buzzing just loud enough to pull him out of sleep without disturbing the neighbors through the thin apartment walls. He reached over and shut it off before it could finish the second buzz. The room was still dark, Outside, the Bronx hadn't fully woken up yet, but it wasn't asleep either. Somewhere down the street, a bus hissed to a stop. A car radio thumped low bass through the early air. The faint glow of a flickering streetlight bled through the curtain and stretched across the floor in a crooked line. Malik sat up slowly. No hesitation. No stretching. Just up. Routine. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood barefoot on the cold floor. The apartment smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something warm, coffee that had been brewed hours earlier and left on the stove. His mother had already gone. Of course she had. Malik stepped into the kitchen. The overhead light buzzed when he flipped the switch. On the small table by the window sat a plate wrapped in foil and a folded note. He didn't open the note. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled the chair out, sat down, and reached for the object already waiting there. A magnetic travel chess set. The board was worn along the edges, corners softened from years of being packed and unpacked, carried in a backpack that had seen better days. A few of the pieces had lost their shine. One pawn had a small crack running through its base, and the queen was missing. It had been gone for over a year. Malik didn't replace it. He never tried to. He set the board in front of him and began placing the pieces with quiet precision. White on one side, black on the other. When he reached the empty square where the queen should have been, he didn't pause. He just left it empty. Then he sat back. For a moment, nothing moved. No music, no voices. Just the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant sound of a train passing somewhere underground. Malik leaned forward and made the first move. Pawn to e4. Across from him, no opponent. Didn't matter. He answered his own move. Black pawn to a5. His fingers steady, his breathing even. His eyes didn't dart around the board like most beginners. They didn't chase pieces. They absorbed the whole thing. Position. Space. Possibility. Move by move, he played through a game he had memorized years ago. Not from a coach, not from a class. From a book so old its pages had turned the color of weak tea. He didn't read it anymore. He knew it. By move 10, the board had shifted into something more complicated. Lines opening, pieces coordinating. Malik's fingers moved faster now, confident, almost mechanical. Then he stopped. Not because he didn't know what came next, because he saw something else. A variation. A different path. He tilted his head slightly, studying the position. The missing queen didn't change anything for him. It never had. If anything, it made the board quieter. Cleaner. You didn't rely on power. You built it. He reached for a knight, moved it forward, and just like that, the game changed. A small sound came from the doorway. Malik didn't turn. "You're up early." The voice was soft, familiar. Mrs. Alvarez from down the hall leaned against the doorframe, holding a grocery bag in one hand. She had a way of entering without knocking, like she belonged everywhere she stepped. Malik glanced up, offering a small nod. "Morning." She watched him for a second, then stepped inside. "You always do that before school?" "Most days." She set the bag down on the counter and peered at the board. "You ever play real people?" Malik shrugged. "Sometimes." She smiled, shaking her head. "My grandson thinks he's good at that game. Spends all day on his phone playing it." She pointed at the empty square. "You missing something there?" Malik looked at the board, then back at her. "No," he said. She studied his face for a moment longer, like she might ask something else. Then she just nodded, as if she understood more than she let on. "Well," she said, heading back toward the door, "don't be late for school." Malik didn't answer. He was already back in the game. By the time the sun finally broke over the rooftops, casting pale light across the kitchen table, the board was frozen in a final position. Checkmate. Malik sat there for a moment, looking at it. Not proud, not surprised, just finished. He reached out and reset the pieces. Again. Hours later, in a crowded school hallway that smelled like cheap disinfectant and cafeteria grease, Malik moved differently, quieter, smaller, not invisible, but close. Students brushed past him without looking. Lockers slammed. Someone laughed too loud down the hall. A basketball bounced somewhere it shouldn't have been. Malik kept his head down, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The black night pin caught the fluorescent light for a second as he turned the corner. "Yo, chess boy," someone called out. Malik didn't stop. "You still playing that nerd game?" Laughter followed him down the hall. He didn't respond, didn't slow down, didn't speed up, just kept walking. At lunch, he sat in the far corner of the cafeteria, the same spot he always took. A plastic tray in front of him, untouched. The chess set open again. Different position this time. More complex. A kid from 2 tables over watched him for a while, curiosity fighting with hesitation. Finally, he stood up and walked over. You teach that?" the kid asked. Malik looked up. The boy couldn't have been older than 12. Too small for his age. Nervous hands. Malik nodded once. "You want to learn?" The boy hesitated, then nodded back. Malik slid a pawn forward. "This is the smallest piece," he said quietly. "But if it keeps going, it can become the strongest." The boy leaned in, eyes wide. "Really?" Malik allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. "Yeah." He didn't notice the bell ringing, didn't notice the cafeteria emptying out, didn't notice the way the boy sat a little straighter after just 3 moves, but someone else did. From across the room, a teacher paused in the doorway, watching for a moment longer than necessary. Then she moved on. By the time the day ended, Malik was back on the street, walking home under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or not. The city moved around him. Cars, voices, sirens in the distance. Same as always. Nothing special. Nothing remarkable. Just another day. And yet, hours later, in a penthouse filled with people who believed they had seen everything, they were about to learn just how much they had missed. Back in that room, under the weight of chandeliers and expectation, Malik's fingers hovered over the board. The first move had been made. But the game they thought they were watching wasn't the one he was playing. Across from him, Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, confident, amused, completely certain of how this would end. He glanced at the crowd, raising his glass slightly as if to toast the moment. "Let's not drag this out," he said. Malik didn't answer. He just looked at the board, and in that silence, something shifted. Not loud, not visible, but real. Because while everyone else in that room was watching a boy sit down at a table he didn't belong at, Malik Turner was already 10 moves ahead, and no one, not Ethan, not the guests, not even the cameras quietly recording, had any idea what was coming next. The room held its breath, but not in respect. In curiosity. Malik's fingers rested lightly on the table, just beside the board. Across from him, Ethan Caldwell swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the slow movement like it mattered more than the game. "Go on," Ethan said, nodding toward the board. "Make it interesting." Malik didn't look at him. He moved his knight. A simple move. Quiet. Clean. The kind of move that didn't impress anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Ethan smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Good," he said. "At least you know how the pieces move." A few people chuckled again, softer this time. The first layer of amusement hadn't disappeared, but something beneath it had shifted, subtle, almost unnoticeable. Across the room, near the service corridor, Janice Turner stood perfectly still. The tray in her hands was empty now, but she held it like it weighed something. Her fingers tightened around the edges, knuckles pale against the silver. She hadn't moved since Malik sat down. Not forward, not back. Just there, watching. Her eyes never left him. 12 years in this building had taught her one thing better than anything else: how to disappear, how to become part of the background, like the furniture or the walls or the quiet hum of air conditioning that nobody ever noticed until it stopped. Tonight, she had done everything right. Arrived early, kept her head down, followed every instruction, stayed invisible, until her son walked into the room and made invisibility impossible. A man brushed past her, not looking, his shoulder clipping the edge of her tray. "Careful," he muttered, like she had been in his way. Janice stepped back immediately. "Sorry," she said softly. He was already gone. She lowered her eyes again, but her gaze found Malik almost instantly, drawn back like something she couldn't control. He sat straight in the chair, not slouched, not tense, just steady. That steadiness scared her more than anything, because she knew what it meant. Years ago, when Malik was 10, she had seen that same stillness in him the day he came home from school without his jacket. It had been winter, cold enough that your breath turned white in the air. "Where is it?" she had asked. He had shrugged. Someone needed it more. She had wanted to ask more, to demand names, to understand. But she saw it in his face, that quiet, that decision already made, and she had let it go. Tonight felt the same, only bigger, more dangerous. "Janice." The voice snapped her back. She turned quickly. Mr. Harlan, the event manager, stood a few feet away, arms crossed, expression tight. "What are you doing?" he asked under his breath. She started, then stopped. There was no good answer. "You're not paid to watch," he said. "You're paid to work." Her grip tightened on the tray. "Yes, sir." "Then work." His eyes flicked briefly toward Malik, then back to her. "And keep him under control. This isn't a show." Janice nodded, even though she knew she couldn't do what he was asking. Couldn't walk into that circle of wealth and glass and interrupt the moment. Couldn't pull her son away. Not now, not when every eye in the room was already on him. She turned, forcing herself to move, to pick up glasses, to adjust napkins that didn't need adjusting. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind her, a burst of soft laughter rose again. "Look at him," someone whispered. "He thinks he belongs there." Janice kept walking, didn't react, didn't turn. But the words landed. They always did. At the table, Ethan made his move, casual, almost careless. "Let's speed this up," he said. "I've got guests to entertain." Malik nodded once. Another move, another response. The pieces began to shift. To anyone watching without understanding, it looked like a game. To Janice, it looked like something else. A line being crossed. She set down a glass too hard. It clicked sharply against the marble table, drawing a brief glance from a woman in diamonds. "Careful?" the woman said, her voice thin with irritation. "Yes, ma'am," Janice replied, lowering her head. The woman turned away, already forgetting her. That was how it worked here. Mistakes were remembered. People were not. Janice moved again, her path bringing her closer, just a little closer, to the center of the room. Close enough now that she could hear their voices more clearly. Ethan chuckled. "You're quiet," he said. "Most people your age talk more, especially when they're about to lose $3 million. Malik didn't answer. He didn't look up. He just studied the board. That silence began to stretch. Not awkward, not weak, just present. And for the first time, Ethan's smile flickered. Just for a second. Janice saw it. It was small, easy to miss. But it was there. She took a step closer without realizing it. Another. Until she stood just outside the circle of guests, half hidden behind a column, her hands clasped in front of her. From here, she could see the board. She didn't understand the game. Not really. She knew how the pieces moved. That was all. But she understood something else. Faces. And the faces around that table were changing. Not dramatically. Not all at once, just enough. The laughter had softened. The whispers had slowed. Eyes were staying on the board a little longer than before. Ethan leaned forward now, his glass forgotten on the table beside him. He murmured, almost to himself. Malik made another move. Quick, certain, no hesitation. Ethan paused. His hand hovered over a piece, then pulled back. He shifted in his chair, adjusting his posture like he suddenly needed to get more comfortable. The room felt different now. Quieter. Not silent, but focused. Janice felt her heartbeat in her throat. She didn't know what was happening. But she knew it wasn't what everyone expected. A man near her lifted his phone higher, framing the shot more carefully now. "This might actually be something," he whispered to the woman beside him. Janice closed her eyes for a brief second. Just one. A prayer without words. Not for victory. Not for money. Just for dignity. When she opened them again, Malik was still there. Still calm. Still steady. Still playing like nothing else in the world existed. And for the first time since he walked into that room, Janice didn't see a boy sitting at a table he didn't belong at. She saw something else. Something she had always known was there, but had never seen this clearly before. Across the board, Ethan picked up a piece again. This time he didn't smile. He moved it carefully, then leaned back, studying Malik with a new expression. Not amusement, not yet fear, but something closer to attention. Real attention. The kind you don't give to something beneath you. The kind you only give when you're starting to realize you might have misjudged the board. And somewhere in the crowd, just behind a line of guests who had stopped pretending not to care, Rachel Stein lowered her glass, her eyes fixed on the board, then on Malik. Then, briefly, on the small black knight pinned to his bag. Her brow furrowed slightly, like she had just seen something she couldn't unsee. Rachel Stein didn't move at first. The glass in her hand stayed suspended halfway between the table and her lips, untouched. Around her, the room continued its slow shift, voices dropping, laughter thinning, the soft hum of conversation narrowing into something sharper. Focus. She had seen that look before. Not here. Not in rooms like this, where confidence was usually loud and borrowed, where intelligence was performed, not tested. No, she had seen it in courtrooms, in quiet witnesses who didn't need to raise their voice to change the outcome of everything. Her eyes moved back to Malik. He hadn't changed his posture since she first noticed him. No nervous movements. No restless shifting in his seat. His shoulders were relaxed, his breathing steady. The kind of stillness that didn't come from trying to appear calm. It came from being calm. On the board, pieces were beginning to gather toward the center. Ethan leaned forward again, his earlier ease fading just enough to be noticeable. He tapped a finger lightly against the table, a rhythm that didn't match the music anymore. Interesting, he murmured, though the word didn't sound like praise. He moved a bishop, sliding it across the board with a touch more force than necessary. Malik responded almost instantly. No pause, no reconsideration. Just a move. Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. Too fast. Not reckless fast. Not careless. Certain. She lowered her glass slowly and set it on the table beside her without looking. Something wasn't lining up. Across the room, a man laughed, trying to pull the atmosphere back into something familiar. He's just lucky, he said. Beginner's luck. Happens all the time. No one answered him. Not because they disagreed, because they weren't sure anymore. The board didn't look like a beginner's game. Even to the untrained eye, something about it felt different. Balanced, but tense. Like a conversation where one person already knew how it would end. Janice stood frozen behind the column, her hands clasped tightly now, fingers interlocked as if holding herself together. Her eyes darted between the board and Malik's face, searching for something, anything, that would tell her this was still under control. But she didn't understand the moves. She understood something else. The way Ethan's jaw had tightened, the way his laughter had stopped, the way people were no longer looking at Malik like he was a joke. That was enough. A waiter passed behind her, carrying a tray of untouched champagne flutes. You okay? He whispered without slowing. Janice nodded quickly. I'm fine. She wasn't. She could feel it building. Not outside. Inside the room, inside the silence. Back at the table, Ethan shifted in his chair again. His hand hovered over a knight this time, fingers brushing the top of the piece before pulling away. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Where'd you say you learned to play? He asked, his tone casual again, but forced. Malik didn't look up. Here and there, he said. A few guests exchanged glances. That answer didn't satisfy anyone, least of all Ethan. Well, Ethan said, chuckling lightly, though it didn't quite land the same way it had before. You picked an interesting place to show off. Malik didn't respond. He made another move. Rachel leaned forward slightly now, her attention narrowing completely. There, that was it. A small shift in position. A piece placed not where most players would put it, but where it created something deeper, something not immediately obvious. Her heart gave a faint, involuntary beat. That wasn't beginner's luck. That was intent. She stepped closer to the circle, weaving quietly between guests who had unconsciously moved inward. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. Their attention was locked on the board, on the unfolding pattern they couldn't quite name. Hey, a man near the front muttered, lowering his voice. Is that kid actually playing him? Another shrugged, but his eyes didn't leave the table. Looks like it. Caldwell's not that good, someone else whispered. Still, the sentence trailed off, because now they weren't sure how to finish it. Ethan leaned forward again, his movements sharper now, less fluid. He picked up a pawn and moved it with a small, decisive tap. There, he said quietly. Let's see what you do with that. Malik studied the board, for the first time since the game began. He paused. Not long. Just long enough. The room tightened around that pause. Rachel felt it. The difference between thinking and calculating, between hesitation and choice. Malik's eyes moved across the board, not in quick jumps, but in a slow, deliberate sweep. He wasn't looking at one piece. He was seeing everything. Then he moved. A knight. Forward, into the center. It landed with a soft click, and something shifted. Not visibly, but undeniably. Ethan blinked. Just once. His fingers curled slightly on the edge of the table. That move. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't reactive. It was pressure. Rachel inhaled quietly. She didn't mean to, but she couldn't help it. Because now she knew not everything, but enough. Her eyes flicked down again, past the table to the side of Malik's chair, to the backpack, to the small black night pin barely visible in the dim glow of the chandelier light. She stepped closer, closer than she intended. Her mind was already moving ahead, connecting pieces that had nothing to do with the board in front of them. A tournament she had read about months ago. An anonymous player, initials only, unbeaten, no face, no background, just a record that didn't make sense. Her pulse quickened. No. That was impossible, wasn't it? Behind her, someone raised their phone higher, adjusting the angle. "Get this," they whispered. "Something's happening." Rachel didn't take her eyes off Malik. Because now she wasn't watching a kid play chess. She was watching someone who had been playing long before he walked into this room. And for reasons no one else seemed to understand, he had chosen this moment to stop hiding. The realization didn't land all at once. It moved through the room the way a cold draft slips under a door, slow, subtle, undeniable. Rachel didn't blink. Not when Malik's knight settled into the center like it belonged there. Not when Ethan's fingers lingered just a little too long above his next piece. Not when the laughter, what little remained of it, finally disappeared. Because now she wasn't guessing anymore. She was watching. Really watching. And what she saw didn't fit the story everyone in that room had already decided to believe. Ethan cleared his throat, the sound dry, sharper than he intended. He reached for his glass, took a sip, then set it down harder than before. "All right," he said, louder now, as if volume could restore control. "Let's pick it up." He leaned forward and made his move quickly. Too quickly. The piece landed with a faint tap that echoed in the silence. A few guests shifted, sensing something but not yet understanding it. Phones stayed raised. Eyes stayed fixed. Malik didn't react. He studied the board, just for a second. Then he moved. The speed wasn't reckless. It was efficient, like he had already seen the position 10 moves ahead and was simply catching up to it. Ethan's jaw tightened. He leaned in again, elbows now resting on the table, posture no longer relaxed. The glass of scotch sat untouched beside him. Another move. Another response. The rhythm of the game began to change. It wasn't back and forth anymore. It was pressure. Invisible to most. Unmistakable to anyone who understood. Rachel felt it in her chest. A slow tightening. Because this wasn't a kid trying to survive a game. This was someone building something. Move by move. Quietly. Across the room, a man in a gray suit whispered, "He's not bad." "Not bad?" The woman beside him muttered. "Caldwell's just playing around." But her voice lacked conviction, because Ethan wasn't playing around anymore. Not really. He shifted again, loosening his tie just slightly, fingers brushing the knot as if it had suddenly grown tighter. He stared at the board, longer this time. His eyes moved from one piece to another, searching for something that should have been obvious. An opening, a mistake, a way back into control. He found none. Malik moved again. A pawn. Forward. Simple. Unremarkable. And yet, Ethan blinked. because that pawn didn't just advance. It supported something else, something deeper, something that wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, forcing a small smile. "Beginner's luck," he said, glancing toward the crowd, as if inviting them back into the joke. No one laughed. Not this time. The silence wasn't polite anymore. It was watching. Janice felt it shift behind her. She didn't turn, didn't dare. But she could feel the weight of attention moving, not away from Malik, but toward him, toward the table, toward something none of them had expected. She pressed her hands together tighter, her fingers trembling just slightly. Please, she thought. Not out loud. Never out loud. Just inside. Please don't let this go wrong. But deep down, something else was growing. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope. Not yet, but the memory of it. At the table, Ethan made another move, this time slower, more careful. The piece slid into place with a soft, deliberate sound. He leaned back, studying Malik now instead of the board. "Where'd you say you learned this?" he asked again, but the tone had changed. Less amused, more probing. Malik didn't look up. "Same place as you didn't," he said quietly. A few heads turned. The words weren't loud, but they landed. Ethan's smile faded completely. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance. Maybe even a hint of something sharper. But it passed quickly, replaced by something else. Focus. Real focus. He leaned forward again, this time both hands on the table, his attention fully locked on the board. The performance was over. This was something else now. Something he hadn't planned for. Rachel took another step closer, drawn in without realizing it. Her mind was moving fast now, connecting patterns, recalling articles, tournament results, fragments of information that had seemed disconnected before. A player with no name. A record that didn't make sense. Games that ended too cleanly, too precisely. Her eyes dropped again, just for a second, to the black knight pin, then back to Malik's hands. Steady, controlled, familiar. Her pulse quickened. No. It couldn't be. And yet, on the board, the position had shifted again. Ethan's pieces looked crowded, not trapped, not yet, but uncomfortable, like they were running out of space to breathe. Malik's pieces, on the other hand, they moved together, quietly, supporting each other, building something that wasn't obvious until it was too late. Ethan noticed it now. He had to. His fingers hovered over a rook, then pulled back, over a knight, then back again. For the first time all night, he didn't know what to do. The room felt it, a collective inhale. Subtle. But there. "Wait," someone whispered near the back. "Is he losing?" "No," another voice said quickly. "No way!" But the doubt had already entered the room, and once it did, it didn't leave. Ethan finally made a move. Not confident, not clean, just necessary. Malik responded instantly. No hesitation, no second guessing. The piece clicked into place, and something cracked. Not loud, not visible, but real. Ethan froze for half a second, his eyes locked on the board, then flicked up to Malik. Really looking at him now, not as a joke, not as a distraction, but as an opponent, a real one. And that was the moment everything changed. Because once you see someone clearly, you can't go back to pretending you didn't. Across the room, Rachel's breath caught. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table, because now she was sure. Not guessing, not wondering. Sure. And whatever came next was going to change more than just this game. It was going to change the room. But not yet. Not in a way anyone could name. Not in a way anyone could stop. The game moved forward, quiet and relentless. Ethan leaned closer to the board now, both elbows planted firmly against the polished wood. The easy rhythm he had carried into the match, the casual arrogance, the half-smile that never quite left his face was gone, replaced by something tighter, something controlled, but not calm. Not anymore. He made his move with care this time, sliding a piece forward as if testing the ground beneath his own feet. The sound it made, soft, deliberate, echoed louder than it should have. Malik watched. Not the piece, the board. All of it. Then he moved. A bishop. Simple, precise. And again, there was no hesitation. Across the room, the shift deepened. People weren't just watching anymore. They were leaning in, drawn by something they couldn't explain but couldn't ignore either. Phones stayed raised, but the whispers had faded. Even the background music, still playing somewhere beyond the glass walls, felt distant now, like it belonged to a different night entirely. Janice stood at the edge of it all, her body angled just enough to stay out of sight. Her eyes locked on Malik. Her breathing had slowed, but her heart hadn't. It pressed hard against her chest, each beat carrying something new. Not just fear, not just worry. Something else, something she didn't recognize at first. Then she did. Pride. She swallowed it down immediately. Not here, not in this room, but it was there, and it wouldn't leave. A voice broke the silence behind her. You see that? Janice didn't turn. Two guests stood just a few feet away, their voices low but not careful enough. He's controlling the center, one said, pointing slightly toward the board. Caldwell's giving him space. That's nothing, the other replied, though his tone wavered. He'll close it down. Yeah, the first said, slower now. Maybe. That word hung in the air like a crack in glass. Back at the table, Ethan shifted again. His fingers hovered over a pawn, then pulled back. He rubbed his thumb against his index finger. A small, unconscious movement. He wasn't looking at Malik anymore. He was looking at the position, trying to understand how it had changed so quickly. How something that had started as entertainment had become something else. Malik moved again. A pawn. Forward. Quiet. Unremarkable. But it changed the shape of the board. Ethan saw it. He had to. His eyes narrowed slightly, tracking the lines, the connections forming between pieces that hadn't been there before. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, then forced a small laugh. Not bad, he said, though the words felt thinner now. You've got some instincts. Malik didn't respond. Didn't even look up. Across the room, Rachel's gaze flicked between the board and Malik's hands. She wasn't guessing anymore. She was confirming. Every move added another piece to something she had already begun to see. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, her mind drifted, just for a moment, away from the room, back to a different place, a smaller one, years earlier. A community center on the edge of Brooklyn, tucked between a laundromat and a corner store that never seemed to close. The walls had been painted a dull shade of beige that couldn't decide if it was meant to brighten the space or hide the wear beneath it. She had gone there once, on a case. Nothing important, just passing through. But she remembered the sound, the quiet, not silence, focus. A handful of kids sitting around folding tables, pieces moving slowly across cheap boards. An older man, thin, patient, leaning over one of them, speaking softly. And one boy, younger than the others, not talking, just watching, then moving. Rachel blinked, the memory fading as quickly as it came. Back in the penthouse, Malik made another move, and the connection tightened. Her breath caught slightly. No. It couldn't be. That was years ago. Different place, different time. But the feeling, the way the game unfolded, the way the moves didn't just respond, but shaped what came next. It was the same. At the table, Ethan made a sudden move. Too fast. A piece pushed forward with a little more force than necessary. A reaction, not a plan. A few people noticed. A murmur rippled through the crowd, barely audible but present. Malik looked at the board. Just for a second. Then he moved. Another quiet adjustment. Another piece falling into place, and just like that, the tension changed. It wasn't balanced anymore. Not evenly. Something was tipping. Janice felt it before she understood it. Her grip loosened slightly, the tension in her hands easing without her realizing why. She took a small step forward. Just one. Close enough now to see the board more clearly. She didn't know what the pieces meant, but she knew what she was seeing. Malik wasn't reacting. He was leading. That realization hit her like a quiet wave, and for the first time since this began, she wasn't afraid of what might happen next. Across the room, a man lowered his phone just slightly. "Wait," he whispered, almost to himself. "He's not losing." No one corrected him, no one argued, because now they weren't sure what they were watching anymore. Ethan leaned forward again, his movements sharper now, more deliberate, but less certain. He studied the board, his eyes moving faster, searching harder. For something. Anything. A mistake. An opening. A way to regain control. But the board didn't give him one. Malik had already taken it. Piece by piece. Move by move. Without raising his voice. Without changing his expression. Without asking for anyone's attention. And now he had it. All of it. Rachel stepped even closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where have I seen you before?" It wasn't a question meant for anyone else, but it lingered in the air, because the answer, when it came, was going to change everything. Rachel didn't move, but inside, everything was moving. Fast. Too fast. Her eyes stayed locked on Malik, but her mind was no longer in that room. It was racing through fragments, old articles, tournament summaries, anonymous rankings buried deep in databases most people never looked at. A name that wasn't a name, just initials. MT. She had dismissed it at the time. Everyone had. Because players like that didn't just appear, didn't just win. Didn't stay hidden. But now, standing here, watching this boy, this quiet, unshaken presence across from a man who had never lost control of a room in his life, Rachel felt the pieces align. Not perfectly. Not yet. But close enough. At the table, Ethan shifted again. This time, there was no attempt to hide it. His posture had changed completely now. Gone was the relaxed confidence, the casual lean, the performative ease. He was forward, focused, both hands on the table, eyes locked on the board. He made his move slowly, carefully. A knight repositioned, retreating slightly, pulling back from the center he had once claimed without thinking. A defensive move. The first one. It didn't go unnoticed. A murmur passed through the room, low and uncertain. He's backing up, someone whispered. No, no, he's just repositioning, another voice replied quickly, though it sounded less certain than before. Rachel didn't listen. She was watching Malik. Waiting. He didn't hesitate. He never did. A pawn advanced. 1 square. That was it. But it wasn't the move itself. It was what it did. Lines opened. Connections formed. Pressure built. Ethan saw it. His lips pressed into a thin line. He leaned closer, studying the position as if it might reveal something new if he stared long enough. But it didn't. Because it wasn't new. It had been building. Move by move. Quietly. Unseen. Until now. Janice felt it too. She didn't understand the game, but she understood the room, and the room had changed. Completely. The laughter was gone. Not faded. Gone. Replaced by something heavier. Expectation. She stepped out from behind the column without realizing it. Just 1 step. Closer. No one stopped her. No one told her to move back. Because no one was paying attention to her anymore. They were watching Malik. All of them. The same people who hadn't seen him walk in. Who had laughed when he sat down. Who had agreed, silently, that he didn't belong. Now they were watching him like he was the only thing that mattered. A man near the front lowered his phone slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. Caldwell's in trouble. No one argued. Not this time. At the table, Ethan made another move. Faster now. A bishop pushed forward, aggressive, forcing a reaction. Or trying to. Malik looked at the board. For a moment, just a moment, he didn't move. The pause stretched. Tight. Controlled. The entire room leaned into it. Rachel felt her breath catch again, not because she didn't know what was coming, but because she did. Malik moved, not to defend, not to retreat, to attack. A piece slid into position, cutting across the board with quiet precision. And just like that, the pressure flipped. Ethan blinked. His eyes flicked up to Malik. Really looked at him. For the first time since the game began, there was no amusement left in his expression. Only focus. And something else, something new, doubt. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. That's... he started, then stopped. He didn't finish the sentence, because he didn't know how. Across the room, Rachel took another step forward. She was close enough now to see the board clearly, to see the structure, the intent, the pattern. Her heart pounded once, hard, because now there was no question. She knew, not just what she was seeing, but who she was seeing. Her voice came out before she realized she was speaking. Wait. It wasn't loud, but in that silence, it didn't need to be. A few heads turned. Ethan glanced up, irritation flashing across his face. Not now, he said sharply. We're in the middle of something. Rachel didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Malik, on the board, on the truth unfolding right in front of everyone. No, she said, firmer this time. You need to stop. The room shifted. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Ethan's expression hardened. Excuse me? Rachel stepped forward into the circle, no longer blending into the background. I've seen this before, she said. A few people exchanged glances. What are you talking about? Someone asked. Rachel finally looked up. Not at Ethan. At the room. At the audience that had laughed, watched, recorded, and said nothing. At him, she said. The word hung there, heavy. Ethan let out a short laugh, sharp and dismissive. He's a kid with a board. That's what you're seeing. Rachel shook her head slowly. No, she said. That's not what I'm seeing. Her eyes dropped back to Malik, to the night in the center, to the way every piece supported it, to the way the entire board moved around it. Her voice lowered slightly, but it carried. That structure, she said, that control, that's not something you learn casually. Ethan's jaw tightened. Get to the point, he said. Rachel took a breath, one steady inhale, because once she said it, there was no taking it back. You ever hear of a player called MT? She asked. The name hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. Small, at first, but the ripples spread quickly. A man near the back frowned. The anonymous one? Yeah, another voice said slowly. The one nobody could find. 200 wins, right? Rachel nodded once. Ethan scoffed. What does that have to do with... He stopped, because Rachel was no longer looking at him. She was looking at Malik. And Malik, for the first time, looked up. Their eyes met. And in that moment, everything Rachel needed to know was confirmed. She turned back to the room, her voice steady, clear. The way he plays, she said, the patterns, the timing, that's not coincidence. A pause, a breath. Then, I think you're sitting across from him. Silence. Not confusion, not curiosity. Silence. The kind that settles deep. The kind that doesn't move. Ethan stared at her, then at Malik, then back at the board. For the first time all night, he didn't have an answer. And for the first time in that room, no one was laughing. Not a single sound of amusement remained. Only breath. Only stillness. Only the quiet realization that something had just shifted beyond anyone's control. Ethan Caldwell didn't move, not right away. His eyes stayed locked on Rachel, searching her face for a hint of hesitation, of doubt, of anything he could use to dismiss what she had just said. He found none. Then slowly, too slowly, his gaze turned back to the board, then to Malik, really looking at him now, not as the maid's son, not as a distraction, but as a problem, a real one. That's ridiculous, Ethan said finally, his voice low, controlled, but tight around the edges. You're making a story out of nothing. Rachel didn't step back, didn't lower her voice. I don't make guesses like this, she said. Not in rooms like this. A ripple moved through the crowd. People shifted their weight. Phones steadied. Conversations died before they could begin. 200 wins, a man near the back whispered, almost to himself. No losses, no identity, just initials. MT, someone else repeated. The name spread, not loud, but fast, like something that had been waiting for a place to land. Ethan let out a short laugh, sharper this time. You're telling me this kid, he gestured loosely toward Malik, is some kind of ghost player? Rachel didn't answer him directly. Instead, she stepped closer to the table, her eyes dropping to the board. Look at the position, she said. Ethan frowned. I am. No, she replied calmly. You're reacting to it. There's a difference. That landed, harder than anything she had said before. Ethan's jaw tightened. Rachel continued, her voice steady, almost clinical now. He's not trading pieces, he's building structure. Every move connects. Every piece supports another. That night, she pointed slightly toward the center of the board. It's not just a piece, it's the anchor. Everything revolves around it. The crowd leaned in. Because now, they weren't just watching, they were listening. Players at that level don't think move to move, Rachel went on. They think in layers. Position, pressure, time. He's not playing you. She paused. Just long enough. He's controlling you. Silence. Deep. Unbroken. Ethan's fingers curled against the table. He looked at the knight, then at the rest of the board, and for the first time, he saw it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. Enough to feel it. The imbalance, the pressure, the fact that every move he had made, every confident, casual decision had led him here, into something he didn't understand. His next move came slower, careful, measured, but it didn't carry the same certainty. Malik watched, then responded, immediately. A rook shifted, just one square, but it opened something. A line, a possibility. Ethan's breath caught, just slightly. He leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the board faster now, trying to calculate, to catch up, to regain control of something that had already slipped beyond his grasp. Behind him, a woman whispered, "Oh my God!" Another voice followed. "He's actually losing." "No," someone said quickly. "No, that's not..." But the words faded, because the board didn't lie. And now everyone could see it. Janice stepped forward again, no longer hiding behind the column. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. Her eyes were locked on Malik, her chest rising and falling with each breath as if she were the one sitting at that table. She didn't understand the moves, but she understood what was happening. Her son, the boy who had grown up learning to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay out of the way, was no longer invisible. Not here. Not anymore. At the table, Ethan finally looked up again. His gaze met Malik's. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but something passed between them. Not words, understanding. Ethan saw it now. The calm, the control, the complete absence of fear, and it unsettled him more than anything else. "You..." Ethan started, his voice quieter now. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Malik didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Rachel stepped back slightly, giving the board space again. She had said what needed to be said. Now it was up to the game to finish it. A man near the front lowered his phone just enough to speak clearly. "So he is him." No one corrected him. No one denied it. Because the truth had already settled in. Not through announcement. Not through proof, through the moves, through the pressure, through the undeniable fact that the man who had controlled every room he entered was now being dismantled in front of everyone. Move by move, without a single raised voice. Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. His eyes flicked back to the board, then to the check still lying beside it. $3 million. It looked different now. Not like a display, not like power, like a risk. A real one. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt something he hadn't expected to feel tonight. Not irritation, not anger. Fear. Small, sharp, and growing. Malik moved again. Quiet, precise, final in a way that wasn't obvious yet, but was coming. And the entire room leaned forward as one, because now they knew. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a moment. And moments like this, they don't happen twice. The room felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because everything inside it had narrowed to a single point. The board. The two men seated across from each other, and the truth that was no longer hiding. Ethan Caldwell exhaled slowly, but it didn't steady him. It only made the silence louder. He rolled his shoulders back, as if trying to reset himself, to return to the version of the night he had planned. The one where he controlled the room, where every move was predictable, every outcome already decided. But that version was gone. He looked at the board again, and this time, he didn't pretend. He saw it. Not completely, not clearly, but enough to know he wasn't in control anymore. His pieces felt scattered, disconnected, each one standing alone instead of working together. Across from him, Malik's position looked different, tighter, coordinated, like every move had been part of something larger. Ethan swallowed. His hand hovered over a piece, then pulled back. He adjusted his seat again, leaning closer, his face now just inches from the board. For the first time all night, he was trying to catch up. "Go on?" he muttered, more to himself than to Malik. But Malik didn't rush. He didn't need to. He looked at the board, calm as ever, his eyes moving slowly across the position. Then he made his move. A rook slid across the board. Quiet. Controlled. Final in a way that wasn't obvious to everyone, but was unmistakable to the few who understood. Rachel inhaled sharply. She saw it immediately. The line, the pressure, the way it cut through everything Ethan had built. "Oh," she whispered, barely audible. A man beside her leaned in. "What?" She didn't answer, because explaining it would take too long, and the moment was moving too fast. Ethan saw it next. Or rather, he felt it. His eyes flicked across the board, tracing possibilities, searching for escape routes that weren't there. His fingers tapped lightly against the table. Once. Twice. Then stopped. His jaw tightened. "That's..." he started. But the words didn't come. Because there was no word for it. Not one he could use without admitting what was happening. Behind him, the crowd shifted again. Not physically. Emotionally. The energy had flipped. Completely. The same people who had leaned in for entertainment were now leaning in for something else. Something real. Something unpredictable. Phones stayed raised, but the excitement had changed. No longer amused. Now it was tense, anticipating. A woman near the front covered her mouth with her hand. Is he actually going to lose?" No one answered, because no one wanted to say it out loud. But they all saw it. Every move Ethan made now felt smaller, more desperate, less certain. He picked up a knight, held it, turned it slightly between his fingers, then placed it down. A move that didn't solve anything, just delayed the inevitable. Malik responded immediately. Another piece into position, another layer of pressure. Ethan leaned back suddenly, exhaling sharply. He ran a hand through his hair, something he hadn't done once since the night began. The gesture was small, but in this room it was everything, because it meant one thing. He was rattled. Janice saw it. She didn't understand the moves, but she understood that. She stepped closer again, now fully visible, no longer hiding behind anything. No one told her to move. No one asked her to step back. Because no one was looking at her as staff anymore. They were looking at her as something else. The mother of the person at that table. Her chest rose slowly as she watched Malik, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Not of what might happen, but of how big it might be. At the table, Ethan leaned forward again, more urgently now. He scanned the board, faster, his eyes darting between pieces, calculating, recalculating, looking for something, anything, a mistake. But Malik didn't give him one, not a single one. Each move was clean, precise, unavoidable. You've played before, Ethan said suddenly, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Malik didn't respond. He didn't need to. The board was answering for him. Ethan stared at him, then back at the board, then at the check. $3 million. It sat there between them, no longer a symbol of control. Now, it looked like a wager he didn't fully understand when he made it, a risk he had underestimated. A mistake. The realization settled slowly, but once it did, it didn't leave. Behind him, someone whispered, "This is bad." Another voice followed. "No, this is over." Ethan heard it. He had to. The words cut through the silence, landing somewhere deep. He straightened slightly, as if trying to reclaim something, his posture, his presence, his authority. But it didn't work, because authority doesn't come from posture. It comes from control. And he had lost it. Malik moved again. Another piece. Another step closer. And this time, Ethan didn't reach for the board immediately. He just sat there, looking at it, at everything he had built, at everything that was falling apart. Move by move, without a single raised voice, without a single insult returned. Just truth. Rachel stepped forward again, her voice low but clear. "He's setting it up," she said. No one asked what she meant, because they could feel it. The end. Not yet visible, but coming. Inevitable. Ethan finally moved. Slow, heavy, like the piece weighed more than it should have. Malik responded instantly, and something snapped. Not on the board. Inside Ethan. His hand froze midair. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. Because now he saw it. Not partially. Not vaguely. Clearly. 3 moves ahead. No way out. His breath caught. The room leaned in as one, waiting, watching. Because now, this wasn't just a game anymore. It was the moment everything collapsed, and there was no way to stop it. Ethan saw it, not vaguely, not partially, completely. The board no longer looked like a game. It looked like a trap. Every square his king could run to was covered. Every piece he might use to block was either pinned, out of position, or already too late. He leaned back slowly, not in control, not in confidence, but because there was nowhere else to go. The room held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the faint hum of the city outside the glass walls felt distant now, like it belonged to a different world entirely. Ethan's fingers hovered over his king. They trembled, just slightly. Enough for the people closest to see. Enough for the illusion to break completely. He pulled his hand back, then leaned forward again, closer to the board than he had been all night. His eyes scanning every square, every line, every possibility. Looking for something that wasn't there. A miracle. A mistake. A way out. But the board didn't change. It stayed exactly the same. Because Malik had already seen all of this. Moves ago. Rachel's voice came barely above a whisper. 3 moves. No one asked what she meant. Because they understood. Even if they didn't understand the game, they understood the moment. Ethan looked up at Malik again. Really looked. Searching for something in his face. Arrogance. Mockery. Anything that would give him a reason to push back. But there was nothing. No smile. No satisfaction. Just calm. The same calm that had been there from the first move. And somehow that made it worse. "You," Ethan started, his voice quieter now, stripped of everything that had defined it earlier in the night. You planned this. It wasn't an accusation. It was disbelief. Malik shook his head once. Slow, no, he said. And that was it. No explanation. No defense, just the truth. Because this hadn't been planned. Not in the way Ethan meant. It had been built. Over years. Move by move. Moment by moment. Ethan stared at him for another second. Then back at the board. And in that silence, he understood something he had never tried to understand before. There are games you control. And there are games you never had control of at all. He reached for a piece. Moved it. A small, desperate attempt to delay what he already knew was coming. Malik didn't wait. He moved immediately. The second step. The structure tightened. The net closed. A woman near the front let out a quiet gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God. No one told her to be quiet. No one needed to. The room was already silent. Ethan's breathing grew heavier now, barely noticeable, but present. His hand hovered again. He didn't touch the board. Because now he knew. This wasn't about finding a move anymore. It was about accepting one. Rachel spoke again, softer this time. It's over. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second. Just one. When he opened them again, the room looked different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one in control. Not of the game, not of the moment, not of the room. He leaned back slowly, his chair making a faint sound against the floor. And for a second, he said nothing. Did nothing. Just sat there. Then Malik moved. The final move. Quiet. Unforced. Inevitable. The piece settled into place with a soft, almost gentle click. Malik looked at the board, then at Ethan, and spoke. Checkmate. No volume. No emphasis. Just a statement. And somehow that made it louder than anything that had been said all night. The room didn't react immediately. It couldn't. Because it needed a second to catch up, to understand what had just happened, to process the fact that the man who had owned this space, who had shaped every moment of the evening, had just been defeated, completely, cleanly, publicly. Then it broke, not into laughter, not into mockery, into something else. Applause, slow at first. One person, then another, then more, until the entire room filled with it. Loud, real, uncontrolled. Not for Ethan, for Malik, for the moment, for the truth that had just unfolded in front of them. Ethan didn't move, didn't stand, didn't acknowledge it. He just sat there, staring at the board, as if it might change if he looked at it long enough. But it didn't, because the game was over. And for the first time in that room, he had nothing to say. Across the space, Janice stood frozen. Her hands trembled, her breath catching in her throat as the sound of applause washed over her. She didn't clap. She couldn't. Not yet, because she was still trying to understand what she was seeing. Her son, standing in a room that had never made space for him, and winning, not just the game, the moment, the room, the silence that had once swallowed him whole. Malik stood slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just rising. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the applause, didn't reach for the check sitting on the table. Instead, he turned, and his eyes found Janice, across the room, through the crowd, through the noise. Just her. She took a step forward, then another. The distance between them closing in a way it never had before. Not in this place, not in this world. And for the first time in that penthouse, she wasn't invisible. Not to them, not to anyone. Because now they all saw, not just a game, not just a moment, but a truth they couldn't unsee. The applause didn't fade right away. It rolled through the room, uneven at first, then louder, then spreading until it filled every corner of the penthouse. Glasses trembled slightly on tables. Conversations tried to restart, failed, then collapsed again under the weight of what had just happened. People weren't celebrating. They were reacting to something real. Phones stayed raised, but now they weren't capturing entertainment. They were capturing evidence. Ethan still hadn't moved. He sat there, staring at the board like it had betrayed him, like it had changed the rules without telling him. But the rules hadn't changed. He just hadn't understood them. Across the room, someone's voice broke through the noise. "Did you get that?" "Yeah, I got the whole thing. Send it now." A soft chime echoed as a message was sent. Then another, like dominoes. Rachel stepped back from the table, her eyes still on Malik, but her attention shifting outward now. The room was no longer contained. It was expanding. Digitally. Instantly. Unstoppable. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. A search. A confirmation. A name that wasn't a name. MT. The record was still there. Untouched. Unbeaten. And now no longer anonymous. She looked up again, her gaze settling on Malik with something close to respect. Not curiosity anymore. Recognition. At the center of the room, Malik hadn't moved much either. He stood beside the table, the board still between him and Ethan, the final position frozen like a photograph. He didn't raise his hands, didn't acknowledge the applause, didn't even look at the check. Instead, he turned fully toward Janice. She was already walking toward him, slow at first, then faster. The crowd parted without realizing it, creating a path that hadn't existed before. Not for her. Not ever. Her shoes made soft sounds against the polished floor, each step steady, her posture no longer bent, no longer cautious. She reached him, stopped just inches away. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she lifted her hand and touched his face, lightly, like she needed to confirm he was real. "You," she whispered, her voice breaking just slightly. "You didn't tell me." Malik smiled faintly. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "It matters," she said. "It always mattered." Behind them, the room continued to shift, not just emotionally, structurally. A man near the back lowered his phone and turned to the person beside him. "That's Caldwell, right? The real estate guy?" "Yeah. You think this is going to—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because everyone in that room understood what came next. Not immediately, but inevitably. Reputation wasn't built in private. And it didn't collapse quietly either. Ethan finally stood. The movement was abrupt, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the room, silencing it again almost instantly. All eyes turned back to him. Waiting. Watching. He straightened his jacket, his expression hard, controlled, but thinner now, like something beneath it had cracked and was trying not to show. "This," he began, his voice measured, careful. "This doesn't change anything." No one responded, because everyone knew it did. He glanced at the board again, then at the check. $3 million, still sitting there, still real, but no longer his. "You got lucky," he added, though the words didn't carry the same weight anymore. Malik didn't argue, didn't defend. He just stood there, calm, unmoved, and that silence, that refusal to engage, made Ethan's words feel smaller than they already were. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice spoke up. Was it luck, or was it skill? Another followed. 200 wins isn't luck. The murmurs grew, not loud, but enough to shift the balance completely. Ethan heard them, every word, every doubt, every crack forming in the image he had spent years building. He looked around the room, searching for something familiar. Support, agreement, control. He found none. Only faces that no longer looked at him the same way. Rachel stepped forward slightly, her voice calm, precise. "You made a public bet," she said, "in front of witnesses, recorded." She gestured subtly toward the phones still raised. "That check isn't symbolic anymore." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't respond, because there was nothing to say that would fix this, nothing that would put the moment back where it had been. He looked at Malik one more time, not with amusement, not with arrogance, but with something else, something heavier. Then he turned and walked away. No speech, no acknowledgement, just leaving. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And just like that, he was gone. The room exhaled. The tension broke. But it didn't disappear. It transformed into something else. Recognition, respect, and a quiet shared understanding that they had just witnessed something that would not stay in this room. Outside, the city continued as it always did, but inside, everything had changed. A phone buzzed, then another, notifications stacking, messages spreading. The video was already moving, from device to device, from room to room, from one world into another, and somewhere beyond those walls, people who had never stepped into a penthouse like this were about to see exactly what had happened inside it. Malik stood there, still beside his mother, the board behind him, the room in front of him. He didn't chase the attention, didn't reach for it, but it found him anyway. Because moments like this don't stay small, they grow. And this one was just beginning. The video spread before the night was over. By the time the last guest left the penthouse, before the final glass was cleared, before the lights dimmed and the doors locked behind a staff that had spent years being unseen, the moment had already escaped. It moved through phones first, airdropped, texted, shared in quiet excitement, then louder urgency. By morning, it wasn't quiet anymore. It was everywhere. A headline without a headline, a story without a script, just a clip. A boy sitting at a table, a man who thought he controlled everything, and the moment that proved he didn't. By noon, the video had millions of views. By evening, it had a name. Not the billionaire, not the penthouse, the boy. Malik Turner. And with the name came the questions. Who was he? Where did he come from? How had no one seen him before? The answers followed quickly. Too quickly. Old tournament records surfaced. Archived rankings pulled from forgotten databases. Screenshots of match histories, usernames, timestamps, patterns that had once meant nothing, now forming a clear picture. MT 200 consecutive wins. No losses. No identity. Until now. In a small apartment in the Bronx, Malik sat at the same kitchen table where it had all begun. The same cracked clock ticked softly on the dresser. The same worn board sat in front of him, still missing a queen. But the room felt different, not because it had changed, because the world outside it had. His phone buzzed on the table, then again, and again. Messages stacked on the screen. Unknown numbers, emails, requests, offers, invitations. A name he didn't recognize flashed across the screen. Another followed. Then another. Malik didn't reach for the phone. He just sat there, looking at the board. Janice stood in the doorway, watching him. Not as the boy who had left that morning, but as something more, something she had always known was there, but had never seen so clearly. "You should answer," she said softly. Malik shook his head slightly. "Not yet." She stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "They're calling you for a reason." Malik finally looked up. "I know," he said. A pause. Then, "I just want a minute." Janice nodded. She understood that. More than anyone. Because for years, moments like this had never been his. They had been taken, ignored, overlooked. Now he was choosing what to do with one. Back in Manhattan, the silence Ethan Caldwell had left behind didn't stay silent for long. By the next morning, the same video that had elevated Malik had begun to unravel Ethan. Interviews resurfaced. Clips of him speaking about intelligence, merit, discipline. Statements that once sounded confident, now sounded hollow. Employees began to speak, quietly at first, then louder. Stories of how he treated staff, how he spoke when he thought no one was listening. None of it was illegal, none of it was dramatic. But together, it painted a picture, and people saw it, the same way they had seen Malik. Only this time, there was no redemption in it. By the end of the week, partners began to distance themselves. Statements were released, carefully worded, neutral on the surface, but clear beneath it. The man who had controlled every room he entered was no longer controlling anything. And the $3 million? It didn't disappear. It didn't get buried. It didn't get negotiated away. Because too many people had seen it. Too many people had recorded it. Too many people were watching. In a small conference room weeks later, far from chandeliers and marble floors, Malik sat across from a lawyer. Rachel Stein. The same calm presence, the same steady eyes. Only now, there was no distance between them. "It's yours," she said simply, sliding the documents across the table. Malik looked at them, didn't reach for them. $3 million, she added. Clean, no conditions. Janice sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Malik leaned back slightly, thinking, not calculating, not weighing options, just thinking. "What would you do with it?" Rachel asked. Malik didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window, at the city, at the place that had shaped him, tested him, ignored him. Then he smiled. Not big, not loud, just enough. "I'm not keeping it," he said. Janice turned toward him. "Malik." He shook his head gently. "No, Mom. We're okay." Rachel watched him closely. "Then what?" Malik leaned forward, finally placing his hand on the papers. "I want to build something." Rachel raised an eyebrow slightly. "What kind of something?" Malik's voice stayed quiet, but clear. "A place where kids don't have to stay invisible to survive." Janice's breath caught. Malik continued. "Chess programs, community centers, equipment, coaching, entry fees, everything." He paused, then added, "Free." Rachel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "Let's do it right." Months later, in a neighborhood not far from where Malik had grown up, a small room filled with folding tables and mismatched chairs came to life. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Kids filled the space, their voices louder than the room could hold, their energy spilling into every corner. A board sat at each table, complete, every piece in place. Malik stood at the front, watching, not directing, not performing, just present. A little girl raised her hand. "Is it true you beat that rich guy?" The room went quiet. Waiting. Malik smiled slightly. "I played a game," he said. "That's it?" He nodded. "That's it." The girl frowned. "Then why does everyone talk about it?" Malik looked around the room. At the kids, at the boards, at the space that didn't exist before. Then back at her. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "people only notice you when you win." A pause. Then, "But what matters is what you do after." The girl thought about that, then nodded, satisfied. Malik stepped over to a board, picking up a piece. The queen. He held it for a second, then placed it down. Carefully. Exactly where it belonged. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the board in warm gold, the pieces casting long shadows across the table. Outside, the city moved the way it always did, fast, unforgiving, unaware. But inside, something had changed. Not just for Malik, not just for Janice, for everyone who had seen, for everyone who had stayed silent, for everyone who now understood that value doesn't come from where you stand, or what you wear, or who you think you are. It comes from what you carry, what you build, and what you choose to do when the world finally looks your way. Malik looked down at the board, then at the kids waiting for him to make the next move. He smiled.
And began again, because in the end, it wasn't the checkmate that defined Malik Turner. It was the moment he chose to take $3 million and turn it into a room full of kids who would never have to feel invisible the way he once did. This story reminds us that real power isn't in proving people wrong, it's in what you choose to build after they underestimated you. And sometimes the strongest move you've ever made isn't is not on the ball, is what you do when the world is finally watching. So today, think about this. Who in your life might be carrying something extraordinary that you've never taken the time to see? Maybe all it takes is one moment, one question, 1 second of attention. The kind Malik never asked for, but always deserve. If this story stay with you, comment one below and tell me, has you ever seen someone get overlooked until it was too late to ignore them? Because the next story might make you rethink what real strength look like when no one is watching.